A gruesome Christmas-time disaster tonight. A quiet Scottish village, an inferno of flames after a Pan-American jumbo jet homeward bound across the Atlantic went off the radar and went down in the village center. Apparently more than 250 people are on board the PanAm flight to New York. How many were killed on the plane and on the ground is impossible to determine in the heat and confusion of the crash site. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. Pan American Flight 103 originated today in Frankfurt, West Germany. After a stopover at Heathrow Airport near London, Pan Am's 103 flight plan had the 747 heading for New York's Kennedy Airport, then winding up in Detroit. The flight took off from Heathrow at 2:35 this afternoon Eastern U.S. time, northward toward Scotland. Less than 1 hour later, Flight 103 vanished from the radar screens and fell from the nighttime sky over the village of Lockerbie. The giant aircraft with its holiday travelers apparently crashed directly into a gas station. An eyewitness said the resulting tremendous explosion covered Lockerbie with liquid fire. With us now in our CBS News London Bureau is correspondent Anthony Mason with the latest on what we know and how it happened.
The small Scottish town of Lockerbie was in flames as soon as the Pan Am jet hit the ground. Some of the debris struck a gas station. A witness said a ball of fire shot 300 feet into the air.
Well, it was just about 7 o'clock we heard this almighty bang in the whole skylight. I was looking out in the back kitchen, which looks over onto the A74, and it was the sky lit up, and I heard this explosion. I realized it was a plane coming down, so we just got down on the floor.
A long string of houses on Lockerbie's south side was set ablaze. Bits and pieces of the plane were scattered across the town. Firemen had to approach the scene carefully because of the danger that the gas station might explode. Authorities immediately closed the main road between England and Scotland, and dozens of local ambulances were sent in. But roads were clogged with sightseers following the flames. A hospital in Dumfries, Scotland took in a dozen casualties, all of them burn victims from the ground. The plane appeared to be in flames as it came down. Eyewitnesses said it's doubtful anyone could have survived the crash. Among those confirmed to be on board were U.S. military personnel from Germany and 37 students from Syracuse University in New York. One helicopter has reported bringing in 2 passengers from the plane, one of them a child. The report from that helicopter was that both of the passengers are dead. That's the only indication we have so far that any passengers of the plane have been found. The only other information we have regarding the plane and any possible cause does not clear up the picture. That report from air traffic controllers says that all other planes that were in the sky at the time the Pan Am jet came down were still in the sky when that plane was reported missing. So it does not appear that a collision is involved in this crash. Dan?
Thanks, Anthony, and a reminder that for this broadcast, we are live for much of the broadcast, so if it's a little uneven, you'll understand that, emphasizing that the best available information is that possibly 258 persons were aboard the Pan Am flight. There are no reports of any survivors. Now, more than 890 million passengers have flown on all the 747s produced by the Boeing company. CBS News correspondent Richard Schlesinger is here with a look at the history of the kind of plane that crashed today. Richard?
Dan, let me start with the plane in question today, and this is what we know about that plane so far. It is a 747-100 series aircraft. That's the first model of the 747 that Boeing made. The 100 series planes have been in service for almost 19 years. The plane that crashed today was delivered to Pan Am in February of 1970. Now, since it was introduced, the 747 has compiled a comparatively good safety record. The first 747 to go down well into flight was in Japan in 1985. A Japan Airlines flight crashed into the mountains, killing 520 people. The cause for that crash was determined to be a crack in a rear pressure bulkhead. It gave way and the rear part of the plane came apart. Since that time, Boeing has ordered airlines to check those bulkheads, but at least one aviation expert says that was not enough.
I said back then that there should have been an extensive investigation of all 747 pressure bulkheads because they do not meet what I consider to be fail-safe design criteria.
Still, the 747 is considered one of the safest airplanes flying today.
I would trust a 747 probably before I would trust any other airliner.
In fact, most 747 crashes resulted from pilot error or terrorism. In 1985, 329 people died when an Air India 747 crashed near Ireland. Investigators determined a bomb caused that one. And the worst 747 crash ever occurred in 1977 at the Tenerife airport in the Canary Islands. 582 people died there when the planes slammed into each other on the runway in heavy fog. Well, all told, 17 of the jumbo jets have been lost since the plane started flying, and we should tell you that PanAm says this particular plane underwent what's called a major renovation just last year, which would mean that they replaced a lot of the parts. And just moments ago, we got some information from the FAA with the service difficulty report, as it's called, on this particular aircraft. It lists problems like corrosion, missing bolts, smoke in the cabin in one case, and a faulty ceiling panel. That may not be as serious as it sounds because an FAA expert told us that a lot of those types of problems crop up fairly routinely, and it remains to be seen just what shape this plane was in.
And important to emphasize, we simply don't know why this plane crashed today.
Way too early.
Richard, thank you. Our CBS News coverage of today's air tragedy over Scotland will continue in a moment, so stay here with us. Persons believed to be aboard the PanAm jet that crashed today, and there were some, at least, injuries on the ground. CBS News correspondent Betsy Aaron is now with Pan American World Airways officials at New York's John F. Kennedy Airport and has been talking to them. Betsy?
Dan, as of this hour, PanAm officials have not released any list of the passengers or crew aboard, but what we do know is that 37 students from Syracuse University were aboard that plane. They were completing a year's study abroad in England. They were aboard. We also know there was a top-ranking UN official from Sweden, Bernd Carlson, 50 years old. He was aboard. Set up at the airport to deal with such tragedies. The first thing they did was to call in all off-duty ground personnel, report to Kennedy Airport, to be able to handle all the relatives and the friends who are going to assemble here in a private room to be told what's going on. There is a telephone number in New York that those curious and those interested can call. It's a 212 number, and it's 880-1400. If you dial that number, you get a computer. If you hold on, you will get a human being who will then tell you that they will call you back and give you the latest information. So far, there isn't much information to give. Dan?
Thank you, Betsy. Now, our coverage of the air crash will be developing during the newscast. We still intend to be able to talk to an expert on crashes, not on this particular crash, because on this particular crash, there are no experts. We hope to be able to talk to an expert who knows a lot about these kinds of crashes as we go through the broadcast. But while we are preparing that, let's turn to the day's other major story. A big, important settlement involving a Wall Street corruption case today, ending months of negotiations with prosecutors to avoid anyone possibly being indicted on criminal charges in connection with Wall Street's insider trading scandal. A major investment firm today said, yes, it was guilty, and decided to pay the money. Business correspondent Ray Brady reports on the deal.
In the biggest securities fraud case in history, the giant brokerage firm of Drexel Burnham Lambert agreed late today to plead guilty to 6 federal felony counts and to pay a record $650 million fine. In a videotaped press release, Drexel's chief executive, Fred Joseph, said the move made sense for the firm.
To fight this through in a court battle would have taken many more years and tremendous diversion of resources. The settlement leaves the firm in very strong financial condition and allows us to refocus our energies on running the business successfully.
The move ended more than 2 years of investigation by Rudolph Giuliani, the U.S. District Attorney in New York.
If you're dealing with a corporate entity, the punishment, if appropriate for a corporate entity, is a financial punishment. You do not put corporations in prison.
Much of the case against Drexel rested on the testimony of this man, Ivan Boesky, a Drexel customer now in jail for insider trading. In return for a lighter sentence, Boesky gave details on the inside operations of Wall Street's most powerful firm, a firm built up by Michael Millken, the junk bond king. Using high-yield, high-risk bonds, Millken was able to finance billions of dollars in corporate takeovers, building an empire that made Drexel a giant firm and himself a man to be feared in the world of finance.
Until the government investigation started, he was the single most powerful figure in the financial world. And I think that what has happened to him and what he has done, I think that it makes sort of a cautionary tale.
The government had a powerful weapon against Drexel, threatening it with racketeering laws, which could have crippled the firm and cost it hundreds of millions of dollars more in penalties. Even so, Wall Streeters say tonight that this admission of guilt opens the brokerage firm to numerous lawsuits from investors who can say they were victimized by Drexel. Dan?
Thanks, Ray. The so-called junk bond has been a major player in American corporate life for most of the 80s. Now, what will today's action mean to American companies and the people who work for them? Our correspondent Richard Roth has investigated that.
Junk bonds, the securities that made Drexel Burnham rich and famous. Nicknamed junk because credit agencies call them high risk. Profitable because they can yield high interest to investors willing to take the risk. But controversial because, in addition to raising capital for small companies, they've also helped fuel a frenzy of big borrowing for corporate buyouts. And the price of those deals isn't all measured in dollars.
These mergers and takeovers financed by junk bonds leaves the company in a high debt situation. And that means that to pay off those debts, they're often closing plants, they're laying off workers.
When business took a downturn at Revco, the giant drugstore chain, the company missed a $46 million payment due its bondholders. The notes were called and the company filed for bankruptcy. Junk bond boosters say that was an exception.
If you look at the performance of the bonds over a long period of time on an adjusted basis, they perform quite well. Compared to investment grade or other types of securities.
Since 1982, Drexel Burnham has arranged $80 million in capital for Hovnanian, helping to provide jobs for about 20,000 people and homes for 40,000 more.
Drexel is still the biggest player in the junk bond market, helped by an ad campaign that stressed the good deeds debt can do. But critics say junk bonds may have made debt too respectable.
There are promises to pay, but promises made by precarious issuers. People who buy junk bonds hand over fist without regard to credit quality are in effect betting that prosperity is perpetual, and that I think is a very, very long shot.
In fact, some analysts say the next big game on Wall Street could involve a different kind of corporate investment, buying bankrupt companies at bargain prices. Richard Roth, CBS News, New York.
Drexel Burnham pleads guilty. Double raids by U.S. federal agents today. They arrested U.S. Army intelligence analyst William Hall in Georgia on suspicion of spying. They also seized a Turkish-born U.S. citizen, Hussein Yildirim, in Florida. U.S. authorities said they suspect Yildirim had been passing back to the East Bloc details of what Hall had learned in his top security clearance job in West Germany, a job reportedly involving interception of East Bloc communist nation communication.
Tell them that you love them. The Florentine basketball.
More U.S. space shuttle trouble today. CBS News correspondent Bruce Hall reports on NASA's big concern about a small engine crack.
7, 6. We have main engine start.
CBS News has been told that unprecedented vibration during the liftoff of Atlantis earlier this month led to the most severe tile damage ever encountered on a shuttle mission. Officials at the Kennedy Space Center say they will not move the shuttle Discovery to its launching pad until what happened to Atlantis is fully understood. Investigators now believe a small crack developed in one of the 3 main engines during the launch of Atlantis. The resulting vibrations, technicians believe, coupled with high winds and jarring from the solid rocket boosters, may have knocked loose both insulation and the cap at the top of the external fuel tank. This in turn caused a shower of debris to rain down on the shuttle, hitting the critical heat shield tiles on the underbelly of Atlantis. Deep gouges and dings have been spotted in nearly 500 tiles. As many as 250 may have to be replaced.
I'm quite sure NASA is taking that one very seriously. And the fact that they are moving so fast on this tile program is another evidence that they're pretty concerned.
There was more potential trouble for Atlantis in the wake of its flight. Engineers are checking the troublesome solid rocket boosters for possible sooting or burn-through in the nozzle section. Despite a new design after the Challenger disaster, there are indications hot gases still are escaping through some of the nozzle joints. Engineers at Morton Thiokol in Utah, meantime, are complaining that budget pressures have forced them to postpone until next October badly needed test on half a dozen booster rocket motors. Ironically, the National Research Council today delivered a report to NASA calling for more, not less, testing of all booster components.
We're going to depend on the shuttle for human access to space until the early years of the next century. We need to get it right. We need to get it as good as it can be.
The space agency is confident the tile damage to Atlantis can be repaired before its next scheduled flight in the spring. But NASA will have to divert a lot of money and manpower from other shuttle projects to meet that deadline. Bruce Hall, CBS News, Washington.
Homecoming Day.